Hi there! In this video I'm going to give you some more tips about how to take pictures of birds and then edit them in the computer. This video is a follow-up to one that I made a few weeks ago. I'm going to give you some more tips about how to take good pictures of birds. We're going to think about things like perches, good light and focusing, and then we're going to move inside and I'm going to give you some more tips about editing in Photoshop. All the way through, I'm going to include lots of pictures of birds that I've taken over the last few days and then stick a few more at the end. So stick with me, stay to the end of the video, and don't forget, it's really important that you enjoy your photography. Trying to find different perches is always a challenge because you never know how the birds will take to them. And I did try some of these white flowers and unfortunately the birds didn't seem to like them. I don't know whether it's because as they were coming into land they couldn't seem to find anywhere to perch. I'll take you over and I'll show you what did actually work. This is the branch that I was talking about from yesterday. Now the flowers have gone past the best because they're a day old, but the birds just didn't seem to want to land on this. Even though it's very, very close to the feeder, they completely ignored it. But they did land on this branch just here, which is a piece of oak, because I think it's more sturdy and there was more for them to see. As they're coming in, they landed here and then hopped over to the feeder. So that's one thing to consider. Another thing to consider when choosing a perch is try and find something that's in proportion with the birds that are going to land on it. Here we have a very thin twig and the birds actually look much better on a thin perch than something very thick like this one here that's just protruding in. When you get a really very, very thick branch, the perch can become dominant and overpower the bird. One suggestion I did get from a subscriber was to put the bird names on the screen alongside the camera settings information. And that's a really good idea because when you're getting into taking pictures of birds or even just watching birds, naming them can be really confusing. Telling the difference between a sparrow or a reed bunting when you first get into it is really difficult and there's lots of other bird names to learn. So I'll do that in the future. If you do have any ideas or suggestions of videos that you'd like to see me do, I'm always on the lookout for new ideas, so leave them below in the comments and I'll try and have a go at them. While I've been taking pictures over the last few days, it's been very sunny, as it is today, and that's not actually very ideal for creating really good photographs because what happens is you get very, very harsh lighting and the shadows are very dark and the highlights are very bright. It's much handier if you've got overcast conditions because the lighting then is a lot more flat. But you can still work with very bright conditions. It helps you to get the shutter speed very quick, so you might be able to take pictures of birds in action, so that's one benefit. And also you can use the shadows and the highlights to your benefit. So this particular shot here that I've got of the robin on the top of my fence worked very well because the robin was in highlight but the background was in shadow, so it gives quite a dramatic effect. One thing that you might find that if it is very bright conditions that you might need to just dial in a little bit of negative exposure compensation just so the highlights don't get too bright. And then also when you get the images in the computer you can just tone the highlights down. If you take your pictures in RAW then you've got some control over recovering the highlights. And if you look at my previous bird editing video, I go into a little bit more about how you can do that using RAW when you get back in the computer. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to click like, subscribe and the bell notifications. That really helps me and the channel, and it also keeps you up to date with all of my future releases. One thing that I have found useful is the wide area autofocus on the Z6 Mark II, particularly if the birds are moving quite quickly, because it gives you a much better chance of getting the focus lock because you've got a bigger area to focus on. I do sometimes still use a single point if it's very tricky to get the focus because of lots of things going on around. Maybe the camera tries to focus on a branch or something else, and so it does help in that kind of situation. But if you've got a very clear background, the wide area works really well. I have managed to get a few pictures of some jackdaws, and now that's really uncommon because jackdaws are really skittish birds. The slightest movement from the camera and they're gone. So if one does land near where you're taking pictures, you've got to be very careful about moving the camera very slowly, or just rely on luck that they land where the camera is pointing, because the slightest movement and they're just gone. They've got really good eyesight and very aware of their surroundings. I mentioned this perch in my last video, but it's proved to be really successful. One, I can put food down inside the hole so it attracts birds to this location, so I know exactly where there's going to be. So that's one benefit, but also because it's nice and circular, it provides quite a natural looking frame. So as the birds nip in to get some food and then come out into this space here, it provides a really nice composition, and I've got some lovely shots there, particularly of a robin that I'll show you now. That's it for the photography part of this video. Let's nip inside onto the computer and I'll give you some editing tips. We've come inside onto the computer and I'm going to show you a few simple editing techniques to improve your bird photography. The first edit that we're going to do is a very straightforward crop, and people often overlook just how much impact a good crop can have on a photo. Now in this particular shot of a collared dove, I noticed that I'd got a lot of detail in the head part, and the perch was very dominant and not particularly attractive, so I want to crop out the perch and just really focus on the head of the bird. So it's quite straightforward to do. We're going to go up to the toolbar here and we're going to select the crop tool. That brings up the crop handles. Now one thing I always say about doing cropping is always crop in to start with closer than you really think you need to, and that way you can start coming out until you've got just the parts that you think you need to form the image. It's a good tip with any photograph, because quite often you'll have unwanted information around the outskirts of an image that you don't really need and is not really adding very much to that image. So what I'm happy with now is what's left. When I apply that crop by double clicking on it, I'm left with just focusing on the head and shoulders of the bird. I've got a very plain background and it really draws attention to the area that I really want to focus on. Next we have this picture of a robin. Now I mentioned earlier in the video how strong sunlight can be quite dramatic. So we've got the robin here in strong sunlight but the background in shadow. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to enhance that shadow and make it darker still. But before I do that, what I want to do is I want to flip this image, because when we look at an image, we look at it from left to right. So what I want to do is put the bird on the right hand side of the image, so my eye goes across the image and then stops at the bird. So to achieve that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to image, down to image rotation, and then flip the canvas horizontal. That will put the bird so it's looking back into the frame. but you can see that the top of the gate is slightly unlevel. So what I'm going to do is if I click Control T, that'll bring up the transform tools, and I can then rotate the canvas just to make sure it's nice and level. I'm going to bring down a ruler just to see the level. That's okay, and then I'm going to click return, and that will apply that transformation. I can just remove that ruler out of the way so it's not distracting. That'll just slide that out of the way. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to crop down the image because I don't want any of that stuff on the right hand side. I just want to focus on the bird itself. I don't really even need much of the top of the gate. Right, that is what I'm happy with as a crop. I'm going to double click within the crop to apply it. So that's applied the crop, but now you can see that behind the bird are some quite distracting bright twigs, so I'm going to darken that down. Now to do that, what I'm going to do is use what's called an adjustment layer. Now the beauty of using an adjustment layer is I don't change the actual picture itself, and if I change my mind later on, I can go back and change the changes that I make. So that's if that makes any kind of sense. Now down on the right hand side is where the adjustment layers are found, and I'm going to select curves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down the slider on the right hand side of the curves. Now it does affect the entire image, but I'm not going to worry about that just at this second, because now the background is dark, and that's a bit that I'm actually going to focus on. So that's made the whole image dark, but you can see by the side of the curves adjustment layer is a white box, and that's called the layer mask. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select Control I and invert the mask. So instead of being white, it's now black. And what that does is it covers up the entire adjustment layer and basically makes it so it's not having any effect. But if I now poke holes in that mask, the effect will show through, and I do that by painting white back onto the mask. So I make sure that the mask is selected, and what I'm going to do with a white brush at 50%, I've chosen 50% up here just so I can apply more or less of that effect, but I'm going to paint white onto the background, and you can see that that is now darkening down. I'm going to avoid the bird so I don't darken the bird. Now if I want it darker still, I can paint more white onto there, and because it's 50%, and I've done this twice, I'm now applying 100% because I've done two lots of 50% onto the background, and that's darkening it down. Now the beauty of the adjustment layer is if I don't like it, I can change the brush color back to black, and I can paint black back into the adjustment layer and bring back some of that detail. Now it turns out that I actually do like that, so I'm going to paint that white back onto the adjustment layer, and that's what I'm happy with. In this final image of a blackbird, what I want to do is remove this distracting bright spot that's behind the bird's head. It's quite straightforward to do, but what we're going to do is use a selection. And what the selection does is it only lets you apply an effect to a certain area. Now to do the selection, what I'm going to use is the quick select tool, which is up here, and the quick select tool is really useful because it does what it says on the tin. If I drag out that quick select tool, what it's done is it's expanded until it's hit something of a different color or a different focus or a different just something that it recognizes as being different, and it's very quickly picked up the head of the bird. So where these dots are that are flashing, they're known as marching ants. That is the selection. So anything that I do now will only be applied within that selection. And what I'm going to use is the clone tool from over here on the left hand side. To make a clone, what I do is I'm going to choose a bigger brush size. I'm just going to use the square brackets keys to make the brush bigger. Then I push the Alt key, and you can see that the cursor changes to this little crosshair, and that is where I select from. It's where I sample from. So I'm just going to sample from different places because it's very easy to get a repeating pattern if you're not careful. So I'm just going to select from different places. I'm just going to paint different parts of this background. Here we go, into there. Try and make it fairly random so it doesn't repeat. And quite quickly, you can see that I have cloned in background. I've removed that bright spot, but it's not obvious that I've cloned it in because I've selected different spaces, different places within the canvas, but I've not gone into the bird's head because of the selection. So there were a very few simple edits, something that everybody can manage. Even if you don't have Photoshop, there are lots of other good image editors out there. So these simple edits can really go a long way to improving your photographs. What I'll do now is I'll leave you with a few more images that I've taken over the last few days, and then I'll hand over to myself back outside to close the video. Hope you found that video useful today. I've tried to give you a mixture of some photography tips and some editing tips. And don't forget, if you've got any suggestions about future videos that you'd like to see, leave them down below in the comments. Thanks a lot for watching today. As always, you can nip over to my Instagram account, that's @DOakdenPhotography. There you can see lots of my images, and you can also message me there and down below in the comments. Do me a really big favour, click like, subscribe and the bell notifications to stay up to date with all of my future content. Watch out for next week's video, that goes live at 4 o'clock on Sunday. But all that's left now is to say, stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Somebody's mowing their lawn and it's really annoying. It's perch that it... Also, don't forget to... Collared man, I'm gonna shout again.